almonds, which rely on honeybees for pollination, are dwindling an increasingly expensive resource. Pistachios are wind-pollinated, and there's certainly no shortage of wind out here in California. So why are some growers turning to artificial or mechanical pollination?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first reason would be what we call Bloom's desynchronization. And so essentially what's happening is, for various reasons, which I can explain in a moment, we have the male trees, the male flowers, not blooming at the same time with the females. And so obviously if they're not aligned, then pistachios being a wind-pollinated crop, we're going to have less of a yield coming off of the female tree. So desynchronization is one kind of issue that we're able to address. And then another issue is the fact that even though, yes, a pistachio tree is wind-pollinated, growers can't control how much wind's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and so our solution doesn't rely on the wind itself, because we're basically recreating the wind, if you will, right, by applying the pollen at the right time. And then there's some other factors as well. One of them being the actual environment at the time when the pollen is ready to, the male pollen is ready to pollinate the female. There was a situation actually in recent years where it was very hot during the pollination period, and there's some research and some growers that even suspected that may have affected the yield negatively. And so again, we can, because we don't rely on Mother Nature, we can come into the field at a specific time and mechanically pollinate the trees with the right pollen.
So given that growers of wind-pollinated crops aren't paying for bees, how do you make the business case for artificial pollination? You know, how much of an increase in yield, is enough to cover the cost of implementing this technology?
The case for us to come in is to try and provide the grower another tool in their toolbox, just like they would with irrigation or with pruning or with fertilizers, etc., to try and increase the probability that they will have a more stable and secure crop each and every year. And in many cases, we are increasing yield just because we're targeting a good quality pollen at the right time on the trees. And so even in a year where Mother Nature was doing a perfect job, we're still going to potentially add more to what she's doing because we're just adding more pollen at the right time.
So you're just starting out, but you already have one case study that showed a meaningful increase in yields. What results did you see there?
Yeah, that particular case study, which is a couple seasons ago, was 24% on average across the trial. And then last year we did do some other pollination on one grower, which we're continuing with this year and more than likely the next 3 years. And we've seen some significant increases there, and 15, 18, 20% there as well.
Your technology is also being tested on almonds and other crops that are pollinated by bees. Why does it make sense to deploy artificial pollination for these kinds of crops?
So you have this decline in bee population. Then on top of that, other than this year, every single year there's been more and more almond trees, more acreage being planted. So you have this, unfortunately a perfect storm, if you will, for an almond grower. They've got, the struggle to find bees each and every year to pollinate their almonds, and then more almond trees coming into the industry. And so the price of the bees for an almond grower is going up. So just from a pure cost perspective, it's becoming more and more challenging. On top of that, you still have issues similar to pistachios with desynchronization. There's actually some synchronizing issues with almonds as well. If bees are out in an almond orchard, they could be out collecting nectar and pollen, but they may not even be doing the job that the grower paid them to do because of the desynchronization. So again, we have a solution that can come in that is independent of the insects, independent of desynchronization, that can provide a grower another option for them to pollinate their almonds.
Tell me a bit about the approach that you take, collecting the pollen, storing it, and then accurately dispersing it, to where it needs to go.
Even though we're currently purchasing our pollen on the open market right now, the plan is in the next year or two is for us to actually create our own production process. And so we actually have some IP on how to collect and process the pollen in a way so that it's clean and it's viable, mm-hmm. and then also how we store it. And so mm-hmm. that's some IP that we have that we believe is probably one of the most critical steps in the process, because if the pollen is not viable, it's not alive, then it doesn't matter how well you blow it on the trees, it's not really going to do anything for you. And the system itself, the equipment that is applying the pollen, it's essentially we're using air pressure. So it's kind of a high volume, low pressure air pressure that we're pushing through different canisters. So on one of the machines we have, there's 15 different canisters. And the pollen is actually distributed through each of those canisters through a very small tube. Inside of the tube is actually an electrical probe, and we're charging the pollen with an electrostatic charge, a positive charge. And then the idea is that the tree is grounded in earth, so it's negatively charged, and so it's we're giving the pollen a much higher likelihood of it reaching the flower on the pistachio tree and then pollinating. The other main part of our IP is actually on the machine itself. So one thing that we're doing specifically with our machine is we're precisely applying the pollen to each tree. And it is a continuous machine, so we're pulling it through the orchard behind a tractor. But the way that the control system works, we have basically a special recipe with a mechanical piece of equipment we call a dozer that will precisely apply specific amounts to each tree that we go by. So we're not just blowing pollen everywhere. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is that the pollen is expensive itself. And for two, there's actually a potential, there's some research that shows that even if you I don't want to say you can over-pollinate, but putting on too much, you're sort of wasting your time at that point.